brothers and sisters. He had a big family. The majority of those children died before the age of 12. They didn't live very long, and my grandfather was a twin. He had his twin brother, Charlie. And Charlie and my grandfather were attending the Sac and Fox School, and Grandpa hated school. He just didn't want to have anything to do with school, and he ran away as often as he could. He was just gone. He didn't want to get out of here. So Charlie, one time, he stayed behind. Charlie was always staying behind. He was the smart one, and Grandpa was more of the athlete. And Charlie stayed behind the school, and pneumonia came through the school, and Charlie died when he was just 9 years old. And it really affected my grandpa really deeply. I guess the strongest bond that we can have with another human is a twin, is that twin sibling. So when Charlie died, it hurt Grandpa quite a bit. He got really withdrawn, but he got into sports. He was using his athleticness to propel him into getting rid of that sorrow and that pain that he felt in his heart. And it was here that my grandfather met Pop Warner. If you're not familiar with Pop Warner, he's got the Pop Warner football. And it was here that Grandpa met Pop. And Grandpa, when he got here, he was just a really small guy. He only was like 5'5", and he weighed 115 pounds. But he was really good at track. He was at the Garden Grove School, and they had some scouts from Carlisle come out there, and they saw my grandpa play, and they recruited him to come here to Carlisle because Pop was here. And Pop, being the coach that he was, any coach wants to get their hands on a good, talented athlete. And they saw that in my grandfather. And so when Grandpa got here, he really wanted to play football. He was big into football, and that's where he learned to play, was at Haskell Indian School. But because he was so small, and he only weighed 115 pounds, Pop Warner didn't want him to play football. He was like, nope, you're the track guy, and that's just that, and you're not going to play football. So Grandpa sucked it up, and he didn't really play football for a while. He really got big into track and field. And it was in the 1912 Olympic Games. Those games were held in Stockholm, Sweden. And that's where Grandpa got all of his real big fame. He won both of the decathlon and the pentathlon. And at the time, the pentathlon was 5 events in track and field. And how he's the only athlete to win both of the decathlon and the pentathlon. No other athlete has done that. No athlete has done a lot of stuff that my grandpa did. When he competed in those games in 1912, Indians weren't citizens of the United States. They were wards of the court. So Grandpa actually was a ward of the court. He competed as an American, but he wasn't really an American citizen. Another thing that a lot of people don't know, if you look at pictures of Grandpa in those 1912 games, and you look at his feet, he has on 2 different shoes. They weren't even the same shoes. Somebody had come by and they stole his shoes, and Pop went in and looked around and got some shoes out of the trash can, and if you look down his shoes, they're different shoes, and he had to put on an extra pair of socks because the one shoe was bigger than the other shoe, and it didn't seem to matter too much because, well, he ran away and he took everything anyway. Yeah, and he did it all in a pair of shoes that didn't belong to him. And when Grandpa came back from those games, he started playing baseball. What was the big sport back in those days? Football hadn't even really broken out yet. Baseball was the big sport, and he played with the Giants. McGraw was his coach back then. And it was about 6 months after he had come back from those games that they had discovered he had played semi-professional baseball. Now, back in the 1912 Olympics, you couldn't compete as a professional. You couldn't win any money and then go into the Olympics and compete. You had lost your amateur standings. So, and they've got 30 days from the time to file a dispute. If you see something's wrong in the games, you're not happy with what's going on, you've got 30 days to file a grievance. Well, in Grandpa's case, it took him 6 months. So 6 months after the fact, they came to him and they said, hey, you played semi-pro ball, and he didn't deny it. That's exactly what I did, and I used my own name to go play ball. Where a lot of the other students that were here, they used pseudonyms. They used different names because they wanted to keep their amateur status. But Grandpa was never really good at lying, so he just told them the truth, and yeah, I'm Jim Thorpe, and they decided to take away his medals from him at that time. After his medals were taken away, he had a pretty tough life. It floored him pretty bad. He went on to play football. He went on to play baseball. As a matter of fact, he was the first professional athlete to score a touchdown and hit a home run in the same season. He was the only athlete to play baseball, basketball, and football in the same season. A lot of people don't realize that he played basketball. He was on a team very much like the Harlem Globetrotters are today, but they were all Indians. So everybody on the Indian team, they would go around to these different states and these different basketball teams, and they all competed, but it was more of a, not a joke, but like the Harlem Globetrotters are. It was lighthearted, and it was a lot of fun, and they were out there just to have fun. But nonetheless, he was out there, and he got money for playing basketball. So he's the only athlete to play both football, basketball, and baseball in the same season. He was the first president of the NFL. Back in those days, it was called the American Professional Football Association. And Grandpa was its first president. A couple years later, it turned itself into the NFL. And Grandpa was also one of the first inductees into the Hall of Fame. Into the football. Yeah, you go, girl. That's right. That's right. He was the first in the first class to be inducted. He also started back in the early days of football. He hooked up with a gentleman by the name of Walter Lingo, and Walter Lingo was in LaRue, Ohio, and he had dog kennels, and they were famous Airedales, and all the presidents and anybody who hunted. I'm sure, Kenny, you know about the Airedales and they're great hunting dogs. So Grandpa hooked up with Walter Lingo, and they started an all-American or all-Indian football team. And they were called the Oorang Indians back in the day, and it was the smallest NFL franchise ever awarded. And they were all, like I said before, they were all Native Americans that were on that team. So he had his own football team. He was also voted the greatest athlete of the first half of the century. And then later on, he was also voted the greatest athlete of the century. So Grandpa's got a lot of notoriety, and he did some fantastic things.
Amen.
All right. He was also, now after he competed and after his sports days were over, he got into Hollywood, and like a lot of athletes do, and he was big into getting the Native Americans into the film industry. Back then, if you heard the term spaghetti westerns, well, it comes from the term that back in those days they would use a lot of Italians in the Indian films, in the cowboy and Indian films.
Yes.
So Grandpa was big in he wanted the Native Americans to get out there and to be able to represent themselves properly instead of having the Italians out there doing it for them. And so he started an agency, a Native American talent agency, just for Native Americans, and he helped get those guys into films and such like that. Now his experience here at Carlisle was really different from a lot of the other Native kids that went here. He was one of Pop Warner's athletic boys. He was one of his kids. So they were treated much differently from the other students that were here. The students that came here to Carlisle, they were stripped of their culture. They had to cut their hair. They couldn't wear their own clothes. They had to not speak their language. It was a terrible, traumatic experience for a lot of the students that were here at Carlisle. Unlike my grandpa's life was just hard to begin with, but here at Carlisle, he was treated differently. He was on a pedestal. He was not as the other students are that were here. So with that being said, the trauma that the Native Americans are still dealing with to this very day to show love. They didn't know how to love. They didn't know how to caress one another or take care of one another. And to this very day, there's still a lot of trauma that's going on out there. As you probably know, a lot of the Indians and the Native Americans turned to drugs and alcohol as a release or a way to ease that pain. And there's a group right now, it's Standing for Recovery. It's standing, the number 4, and then the word recovery.org. So if you know any Native American people that are suffering from drug and alcohol problems, I've got some pamphlets and brochures that I'll be more than happy to share with you guys. And for those that would like to find help, maybe this is a good way to do it. So Staying for Recovery is a way to help some Native Americans, if you know of anybody that's out there doing that. Now, as I said earlier, Grandpa had a really a hard life. He lost both of his parents before he was 17. He lost his siblings before most of them had turned 12 years old. And he lost his twin brother, Charlie, when they were just 9 years old. So what I'd like to do for you guys right now is to read a poem that my mom wrote. She got up in the middle of the night one evening, and I go down to the breakfast table, and she hands me this piece of paper, and she goes, "Look what I wrote last night." And according to her, she wrote it in just like 15 minutes. So this poem is a poem about my grandfather and his twin brother, Charlie. And this is a poem by John Thorpe, and it's entitled Lost Brother in the Wind. The earth people called him Wathasohawk. His skin gleamed with a ruddy glow. He was an Indian youth, and he ran across fields. He jumped fences, and he shunned things below. His vision came from above. His pleasure was running wild and free. From field to forest he ran, crossing waters whose currents were strong. He was free and could do no wrong. He put together a ball, filled it with dry leaves and twigs. He stuffed these into a stocking material and threw it into the air. He had made a ball. He threw his ball to his twin brother, Charlie. Charlie looked at the ball, looked at Jim, smiled, and kicked the handmade ball that was stuffed with leaves and twigs. Wathasohawk caught the ball under his arm, made a lunge at Charlie, who ducked playfully. Then Jim ran fast. With a ball tucked under one arm, he brushed a bush, he jumped a fell log, he jumped another fence his father had made. He shouted, "Catch me, Charlie, see if you can catch me." Wathasohawk glanced back at Charlie, who stood woefully still. "I can't catch you, Jim. You're too fast as a horse. Besides, I don't feel good, Jim. I'm going home." Charlie went home. Their mother held him tight, tending his feverish body. That night, Charlie died. Jim cried, he sighed, he moaned and he groaned. His heart ached for his brother, who was growing cold. "Who will I play with?" wondered Wathasohawk. "Who will I wrestle with? Who will catch my ball? Will the wind carry my ball to Charlie? Will he see me in the fields? I will wait for him in the cool waters. Maybe he'll join me in the fields and in the water." That's our eagle that just flew over, dipping one wing and then the other, then soaring higher, ever higher. That's our eagle, thought Jim, mine and Charlie's. I'll watch for our eagle every day, and Charlie will see it too. I know he will. Charlie really didn't leave me. He's flying with our eagle. Oh, how I wish I could fly with our eagle and Charlie. I want to be with them. I guess I'll just run some more. I'll run and I'll jump. I'll throw the ball into the wind. But Jim didn't run so gleefully. Jim didn't jump so high. He couldn't. Charlie made his heart too heavy. In 1912, Jim ran. Jim jumped. He put the shot and he threw the javelin. Charlie ran with him. And their eagle flew over Mount Olympus. Wow. Thank you very much.
And we ask, Lord God, that another would stand in their place, oh God, to see the redemption of your intended purpose.
Leviticus 17, it tells us that the life of the flesh is in the blood. And we had a young couple who were expecting a baby, went into hospital to have their baby, and the baby was stillborn. The baby never lived. And so this young mother was taken into a ward, and she received a text from somebody, Ezekiel 16:6. And it says there, when I saw you in your blood, I said to you, live. She thought to herself, this is a very, very strange text. My baby never lived. I don't know what this means. She went to sleep that night, and early the next morning, she was woken up by one of the nurses. And the nurse said to her, remember last night, you lost your baby. She thought to herself, oh, this is where the counseling begins. But the nurse said to her, when I came on duty early this morning, I went into the sluice room and I heard a baby cry. And I went to this newspaper wrapping and opened it up, and your baby is alive.
Send them unto the world, and with the glory that you have given me, I have given it to them. And I saw the arrow shooting through the sky to the nations. It is an arrow that is full of fire, a fury, a fiery arrow, propelled by the wind of the Spirit. And whenever this arrow lands, in whichever nation and in whichever land, the river flow out from the place where the arrow lands and flow in abundance unto the nations, because this is the will of the Father, in the name of